Alex Eala did not like this. Before the US Open even begins, a blunt comment from a tennis insider has sparked real tension around her name. It wasn't an opponent, it wasn't a rival, it was someone inside the sport, questioning whether the player everyone is rooting for is being pushed too far too fast. And once his words got out, fans didn't stay quiet. Because this isn't just about a schedule. This is about what happens when a 21-year-old becomes too popular, too fast, too valuable to protect from herself. Stay with us, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why one sentence from a Tennis Channel analyst turned into one of the most talked about storylines heading into Flushing Meadows.
Let's start at the beginning. Because to understand why this comment landed the way it did, you have to understand just how extraordinary Alex Eala's year has been. At the start of 2026, Eala was a promising name, talented, well-liked, but still fighting for real recognition on the WTA Tour. By the middle of the summer, she was impossible to ignore. She won a challenger event in Birmingham, she reached the semifinals in Berlin, and then, at Wimbledon, she did something no Filipino player had ever done in the Open era. She pushed all the way to the fourth round, taking down a defending champion along the way. For a country where tennis has always lived in the shadow of basketball and volleyball, that run wasn't just a result, it was a cultural moment. Then came the hard courts, the surface Eala has always called home. "I prefer the hard court," she said. "It's the one I grew up on." And she proved it. In Washington, she didn't just win a title. She beat Jessica Pegula, Alina Svitolina, and Naomi Osaka back-to-back to capture her first ever WTA crown. It was the kind of run that turns a rising star into a phenomenon overnight. By the time she reached Toronto, the Eala effect had become a real phrase in tennis media, a term for the crowd she was pulling, the flags being waved, the chants echoing through stadiums that had never once said her name before this year. Even Felix Auger-Aliassime, a world number 4 and far more experienced player, admitted he was looking forward to feeling what it's like to have her fan base behind him. "She is carrying the crowd," he said. "It's going to be interesting." But here's the thing about momentum like this. It doesn't come free. Every tournament Eala added to her calendar meant another set of matches, another set of media obligations, another set of expectations stacked on top of a body that, like anyone else's, has limits. She had already logged more matches than any other player on the entire WTA Tour this season, 56 of them to be exact. A 38-18 record built across an unforgiving stretch of months with almost no real rest in between. And it was starting to show. When Eala reached Toronto, fresh off her Washington title, she looked tired, understandably so, and Belinda Bencic ended her run in straight sets. It wasn't a collapse. It was simply a body running low on fuel after weeks of peak-level tennis. Still, for a player being talked about as a future Grand Slam contender, even a small crack in the armor was enough to make people start asking questions. Was Alex Eala being celebrated or being worn down? That question was about to get a very public, very uncomfortable answer, because someone inside the sport was about to say the quiet part out loud.
This is where the story turns, because up until this point, everything you've heard about Alex Eala has been praise, glowing, well-earned praise. But not everyone watching her season was celebrating. Some were genuinely afraid for her. That fear had a name. Russ Thaler, an analyst for the Tennis Channel, sat down to talk about Eala's punishing run toward the US Open, and what he said next is the reason we're telling this story. He didn't attack her game. He didn't question her talent. What he questioned was something far more uncomfortable, whether the tennis world and its excitement over her rise was quietly putting her at risk. "Let's not forget she's going to be pulled in about 1,000 different directions," he said, describing the sponsorship demands, media obligations, and public appearances waiting for her once she landed in New York. He acknowledged she was wise beyond her years and made of different cloth than most players her age. But then came the line that stopped fans cold. He said he was rooting for her to stay healthy through it all, and then admitted something no analyst usually says about a beloved young star. He said that for tennis to truly benefit long-term, he thought Eala losing sooner rather than later at the US Open would not hurt. Read that again. A tennis insider on national television essentially suggested that an early exit might be better for Alex Eala than a deep run. To some viewers, it sounded like concern dressed up in blunt honesty. To others, it sounded almost like a betrayal, as if the sport was quietly hoping its own rising star would stumble just so she could rest. For a player who has spent her entire career fighting to prove she belongs on the biggest stages, hearing someone suggest that losing might be the healthier outcome cut deep. Because here's what makes this so complicated. Eala has never once talked about herself as fragile. She has never asked for sympathy or a lighter schedule. Her own words, spoken just weeks earlier, tell a completely different story. "I've been a competitor my whole life," she said. I've worked so hard for everything that I have, so never say die. That is not the mindset of someone looking for an excuse to slow down. That is the mindset of someone who has fought for every inch of this season, and who might understandably bristle at being told that stopping early would be good for her. So when Thaler's comment started circulating, it didn't just spark a conversation about scheduling and player welfare. It sparked something more personal, because whether he meant it that way or not, his words carried an implication that Eala herself may not want to accept, that she has already given everything she has left, and that the sport should brace for her to fall short. Was this genuine concern from someone who understood the toll of overplaying, or was it, intentionally or not, an insult wrapped inside a warning? That question is exactly what set off the wave of reaction that followed, and it didn't stay contained to one podcast or one broadcast. It spread fast.
Once Thaler's comment made its way online, the reaction was immediate, and it was intense. Because to really understand why it hit a nerve, you have to look at the numbers behind it. This wasn't an analyst reacting emotionally. He was pointing at something real. And once fans started doing the math themselves, the concern became impossible to dismiss. 56 matches since the start of the calendar year. That's more than any other player, male or female, had logged on the entire WTA Tour heading into the US Open swing. Birmingham, Berlin, Wimbledon, Washington, Toronto, Cincinnati. Tournament after tournament, with barely a pause in between. Each one demanding not just physical output, but the emotional weight of expectation that grows heavier with every win. And then, just when it seemed like her schedule couldn't get any more demanding, it did. Eala agreed to play not one, but 2 exhibition matches in the days leading directly into the US Open, including a high-profile Stars of the Open showdown against rising teenager Iva Jokic at Arthur Ashe Stadium. Add that to her main draw commitments, and analysts began openly questioning whether she would be walking into her most important tournament of the year already running on empty. One tennis commentator put it starkly, noting that if Eala made it to the second week of the US Open, she would have played roughly 8 straight weeks of competitive tennis dating back to Washington, a workload he called unsustainable for a player of any age. That's the context Thaler's comment landed in, and it's why so many fans didn't hear, "I'm worried about her health." They heard, "She might already be too tired to succeed." For a young athlete who has spent this entire season proving doubters wrong, being publicly discussed as a burnout risk before she'd even stepped onto Arthur Ashe felt like a gut punch. Social media picked the story apart from every angle. Some fans defended Thaler, arguing he was simply saying what needed to be said, that no one, no matter how mentally tough, can play at an elite level for 2 straight months without consequences. Others accused him of underestimating her, pointing to the fact that she had already fought through fatigue in Toronto and still managed to win matches. If she could compete running on fumes and emotions, as one former player described it, who was Thaler to suggest an early exit would somehow be good for her? And then there was a third group, perhaps the loudest of all, who felt the entire framing missed the point. They argued that the real issue wasn't Eala's toughness, it was the system around her, the sponsors demanding her time, the tournaments adding exhibitions to cash in on her popularity, the relentless calendar that never once paused to ask whether a 21-year-old's body could actually keep up with her rising fame. In other words, the tension wasn't really about one comment anymore. It had become a referendum on how the sport treats its breakout stars, celebrated right up until the moment their bodies start to protest. So how did Eala herself respond? Not with outrage, not with a public statement. She responded the only way she ever has, by walking back onto the court.
If you were expecting Alex Eala to fire back at her critics, you'd be waiting a long time. That's simply not who she is. Instead, her response came through something far more powerful than words: her results, her body language, and the quiet, deliberate choices being made behind the scenes by the people who know her best. Because here's what almost got lost in the noise around Thaler's comment. Eala's own team had already been thinking carefully about exactly this problem. Her connection to Rafael Nadal's academy isn't just a talking point, it's a genuine advantage. Greg Rusetsky, the former US Open finalist, pointed out that Eala has access to something most young players don't: a mentor who has lived through the exact struggle of overplaying and paying for it physically. He's had that in his younger career where he overplayed a little bit, Rusetsky said of Nadal, then he balanced it out. That experience, filtered through Eala's coaching setup, gave her scheduling a level of intention that critics may have overlooked. Rusetsky himself pushed back directly on the burnout narrative, insisting Eala was managing her load with more wisdom than people gave her credit for. "So I'm not worried about it," he said. "She competes, she fights, she's so mentally tough that it doesn't matter who's in her way." And on the court, that toughness kept showing up in real time. In Cincinnati, her final tune-up before New York, Eala delivered a composed win over Alina Gabriela Rus, hardly the performance of a player who was mentally checked out or physically broken down. Rusetsky, watching closely, didn't hold back his praise. "She has no excuses," he said. "She performs. If she wins, she wins. If she loses, she loses." It was a simple line, but a telling one.
a description of an athlete who has made peace with pressure rather than being crushed by it. Even her own words in the lead up to Cincinnati carried a kind of calm defiance. Asked about her preparation, she kept things simple. My focus right now is to prep for the US Open, some good tournaments. No panic, no hint of the fatigue everyone was so worried about. Just focus. That doesn't mean the concerns raised by Thaler were baseless. Burnout in tennis is real, and history is full of young stars who flamed out under exactly this kind of workload. But it does mean that for now, the story isn't one of collapse. It's one of a young athlete and her team walking a tightrope with open eyes, aware of the risk and choosing to trust the plan they built rather than panic because of one uncomfortable comment on television. The tension is real, but so it seems is the discipline behind the scenes trying to manage it.
So where does that leave us? A young athlete carrying a nation's hopes, standing at the center of a debate she never asked to be part of. On one side, a sport desperate to see her succeed. On the other, a sport quietly bracing for the possibility that its own excitement might be the thing that breaks her. There's something almost heartbreaking about the position Alex Eala finds herself in right now. She didn't create this tension. She simply did what every great athlete dreams of doing. She got good, fast, and became someone people couldn't stop talking about. And in tennis, as in so many sports, that kind of rise almost always comes with a hidden cost. The more you're wanted, the less control you have over how much of yourself gets asked for. Think about what she's carried this year alone. A Wimbledon breakthrough that made history for her country, a maiden WTA title in Washington, a brutal stretch of North American hardcourts, sponsorship obligations, media appearances, a responsibility whether she signed up for it or not, to represent Filipino tennis on a stage it has almost never occupied before. And now, an exhibition match against one of the sport's brightest young talents, scheduled just days before her Grand Slam campaign even begins. It's worth remembering what New York already means to her. A year earlier, in her US Open debut, Eala made history as the first Filipina to win a Grand Slam main draw match, battling back from 5-1 down in the final set to stun Clara Towson in a tiebreak. To be Filipino is something I take so much pride in, she said afterward. When her run ended in the next round, she left New York not defeated, but grateful, writing to her fans, "I've never in my life felt so loved on a tennis court." That is the emotional foundation this entire storyline is built on. Not entitlement, not exhaustion, but genuine love for a tournament and a crowd that has embraced her like family. Which is exactly why Thaler's comment stung the way it did. It wasn't just a critique of her schedule. It touched something deeper, the fear that the very thing Eala loves most, this stage, this crowd, this chance to make history again, might be taken from her, not by an opponent, but by the sheer weight of everything asked of her outside the lines. Maybe that's the real legacy of this moment, whatever happens at this year's US Open. Not a verdict on whether one analyst was right or wrong, but a reminder of how fragile brilliance can be when it's rising this fast. Alex Eala has already proven she can outlast bigger names, tougher draws, and heavier expectations than most players twice her experience. The only question left is whether the sport that made her a star will learn to protect her, or simply keep asking for more, right up until the moment she has nothing left to give. So we'll leave you with this. Was Russ Thaler's comment an honest warning from someone who understood the cost of burnout better than the fans cheering her on? Or was it, even unintentionally, a quiet betrayal of a young athlete who has never once asked anyone to doubt her? Drop your answer in the comments. We genuinely want to know where you stand. If this story pulled you in, make sure you're subscribed, because we're covering every twist of Alex Eala's US Open journey as it unfolds. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next, because if this season has taught us anything, it's that her story is far from finished.